Hey guys, what's up everyone? Welcome back to a new video. I have been working with APIs quite a lot in the past couple of months, and I came across a problem that a lot of you apparently face, which is how to check if something in the API response has changed, if a value has changed. What kind of ways are there? Now in React there are tools like SWR to do that automatically for you, but in bare JavaScript there really isn't a specific function or method that you can use for that, so you actually need to use an interval. The setInterval method is something that comes with JavaScript out of the box, so you can just access this method wherever you want in your code without importing anything. And in today's video I'm going to show you how to do exactly that, which means periodically fetching an API and checking if a value has changed. I think the best way I can show you guys how that actually works is by building a very simple sample application, and for that we will build a very little application where we will transcribe some audio file to text, and then while it's transcribing we will check the completion status, if it's completed or if it's still processing, by implementing this interval. So let's jump right in. Alright guys, the first thing I do here is to create a new folder, and I just call that API fetch demo, something like this, and then I cd into this directory. Now I'm using WSL2 here on top of Windows. If you wanna know why my terminal looks like this, I'll leave a link in the description below on how to get that set up. But wherever you are on your computer, you can create a folder wherever. You can create it on your desktop here if you just have Windows and not WSL, and follow along just the same. And then in here I'm going to create a file. I'm just call that let's call it assembly.js, and then I open up VS Code by typing code dot. We only will be working in this one single assembly.js file here, and one more thing you need to do is you need to install Axios. For that we do npm install Axios, and we install Axios because we do our fetching, our data fetching from the API using Axios. You can also use the fetch API if you want, but I recommend you using Axios if you want to follow along. So our folder structure looks like this. Because we installed a npm package, it created this package.json file, which indicates that we are using Axios version 0.26.1 or higher. Okay, back inside of the assembly.js file, we will first actually need to implement our speech recognition, and to do that we are using a software called AssemblyAI, or an API, a speech-to-text API from AssemblyAI. I've been playing around with this in the past couple of months because I'm building a application, and I've come across this problem myself, so this is why I'm also doing the video. And once you're here, it's completely free to use in a limited case. You can click on get started up here and sign up for them, and once you are signed in you can go to your dashboard, and then you will actually find your API key here. And never share this API key with anyone or upload it to GitHub. I'm just gonna share this key with you because I'm changing it right after this tutorial. You can check out this dashboard here too, and they have a pretty good documentation. If you go to developers and to the 2-minute quick start here, there's a lot of different examples. For now, just go ahead and click on that to copy the API key. The next thing we need to do is we need to import Axios. That's what we do by typing const Axios equals, and then require Axios as a string. And then we do const API key, and then we equal that to our API key inside of quotes. Next, we're going to set up our headers. So we create a new Axios object, and to do that you can simply go here to developers and then go to Node.js. I think this is the correct one. No, this is actually blog article here. Where is it? Here, documentation. So you go to developers, then documentation, then you find a bunch of stuff here, and if you open up the menu and go to walkthroughs, you can find authentication, and then you should make sure that I'll make that a little bit bigger here. All right. And then you need to make sure that you select JavaScript here on the right corner, if it works. There we go, JavaScript. And then we see our headers here. So they set the headers like that. So we're gonna just copy that and paste it in there just like this. So what this does is this basically sends this header with every single request we send over to AssemblyAI. So we don't always need to retype that and have a bunch of repetitive code there. And this is where our API token also is sent with each request. So we set it up, and then from there on we can go ahead and send requests. Okay, now that we have that set, we can just go ahead and replace your API token with our actual API key. Of course, you could just also paste your API key in there as it was in the example. Okay, now that we have everything set up, we also need a audio URL with an audio file that we can actually transcribe or send over for transcription. And for that, I have provided an example for you guys, and I will upload this repository after this tutorial to GitHub and to Replit as well, so you can just copy the code from there. It will be in the description below. Now, this is the audio URL I'm using. It's from some sample audio site, and this just leads to a MP3 file that is around 10 seconds long with some speech. Alright, now to test our application, we can simply go ahead and also copy this example here, which is a post request including the audio URL. So I'm going to copy and paste that in here. So this uses the assembly object we just created with axios.create, and it chains a post request in the back of it. And in here, it actually has the audio URL, an example audio URL, and this value we are going to replace with our audio URL. So we have everything set up on top. So if you want to change the audio URL later, it's a little bit easier than to mess around in all of those things. Okay, so now if we have that all in place and we actually run the application, so I'll give us a little bit more space here. You can run that by doing node and then simply assembly.js. And if we run that, it gets sent there and we get back a response. And if we look at this response, there is an ID included, and we need this ID to actually check the status of our transcription, because now the status is queued. So to basically check if our transcription is ready, we would need to take this ID, this transcription ID here, and copy it. You can do that by just right-clicking on it. And now I'm just going to create another variable up here that I call const transcription ID, and then I equal that to the actual string. So we wrap that in quotes. And then we can go ahead and we can do another request which goes to this transcription ID here. And to do that, we use assembly, and this time we do a get request. So we do assembly.get, and then we need to enter the URL here, which is / GitHub Copilot is already suggesting that here. It's called transcript, and then you put as a template string, you put this ID in here, but we use the transcription ID, I think we called it. Yeah, that looks good. That is the ID, and then we do then, and then we do res, and then we do console.log, and we console.log the response. Okay, and if we now go ahead and we comment out this request, because if we would send this request again, it would send a new transcription over there, and we will get a new ID. But what we really want is we want to check the status of our old ID in here, and we can simply do that by running the code again. So let's do that, and let's see what is the result here. Now this looks a little bit different already. We can see there is the text, so that means the transcription was finished. And if you look up all the way to the header, if we can find it, somewhere there is the requests with our ID, and somewhere there must be the status also. Let me quickly find that. It's here under data, and then it's status completed. Now it went from queued to completed, and probably took about, I would say, 15 seconds, something like this. And we want to check if this value changes automatically without doing all this stuff like sending another request with another function and stuff like this. We want this to happen automatically. So we want to know when the transcription is finished. And by the way, here is the transcribed text. This is the text that is spoken inside of the audio file. Now, to make this a bit easier to understand, now we're looking through all of those responses and through this object. Now, if we actually just look res, data, which is accessing this value here, and then we do status, and we can just send another request there, and then we will just get back which kind of status it's currently in. All right, now that we know how that all works, we can go ahead and implement the automation of this whole process, which means checking the status automatically by using the interval. To do that, I'm gonna move this code down here in case we need it later again. I'm also going to remove this fixed transcript ID variable because we don't need it anymore. Now, what I wanna do is I want to create a function where I wrap everything in. And the reason why I do this is because I want this function to be asynchronous. So I do const and I say get transcript, and then I say async. So we make this an async function. You can look up what an async function is on your own if you don't know that. And then on top of this function, I want to create another variable that actually holds the response or stores the response of our request. So I do response, then we do await, and then we do assembly post, and it seems like Copilot already knows what I want, and he actually knows what I want, or she. And then we do transcript, and then we open this up. There we go. And what it needs then is the actual audio URL, so this is correct. And we need nothing else really. We could define a language, but we don't really need that. So what happens now if we actually call the function? There will be a request, a post request made to the transcript URL, including the audio URL, but we don't do anything with the response yet. And that's exactly what we are going to set up next. Okay, let's get into the interval. Now we need to create this interval. We will access it via the setInterval method. As I said, you don't need to import anything for that. That's a feature of JavaScript. And we're just going to create another function because it is indeed a function. So we need to say const, then we do check analysis completion, let's just call it that, equals, and then it's setInterval. This is the name of the method, and I want this setInterval function also to be asynchronous. So I say async, and then we open up the function here, and this is where we will write our code. Now the first thing I want to store in here is the actual transcript. So I say const transcript equals await, and let's make this a little bit smaller because nobody can ever read that. Await, and then we do assembly.get, and then again we enter this template string and we say / transcript, and then we do our template string in here, and then we do response.data.id. And probably you get it already by now, because this is now actually accessing the response, and it goes to data and it goes to the ID. So this inserts the transcript ID right here. This is what we did manually beforehand with creating this variable up here. All right, let's move on. So what else do we need? We need the actual transcript. So we are pulling that from there. And then we also want the transcript status. So we do const transcript status equals transcript.data.status. So we use that placeholder variable because every time we rerun this interval, it will get updated. That means the updated status will be in here in transcript. So we check transcript.data.status for the actual updated status. Because if we would check response, the response value is outside of our setInterval function. So we would get a wrong, basically a wrong status every time we check that. Okay, now that we have that set up, we can go ahead and actually do something with the data, because so far we don't really do anything. And to check if the status is moved somewhere, we need to have a kind of if-else logic. And for that, I'm going to use a switch statement, because for that case, it's a pretty good use case, I think. So we do switch transcript status, and then we write our switch status in here. So for the first case, which is if the status is completed, I would do something. So I would console.log, what do we log? Let's just for now log the transcript status, if it's completed, right? And also what we want to do, if it completes, we want to break the loop or the interval, because if we don't break out of the loop, it will just run infinitely. Even this condition hits true, the interval will still run over and over and over again. To clear the interval, we can simply call this method. It's called clear interval, and then we need to put the function, the name of the function in there, which is check analysis completion. And at the end of the switch case, we need to break out of the switch case also. Okay, this is our first case. What is the second case? The second case is processing. And by the way, I get those values from the documentation. So if you go to the documentation and you go to submitting files for transcription, it says here the status key shows the status of your transcription. It will start with queued and then go to processing. So it's only very shortly for queued if you just transcribe one audio file. So I'm not checking for queued. And then it goes to processing. This is what we are actually checking now. And then it goes to completed. Now there's one more status here, which is error, in case there's an audio file that it cannot process, which we will talk about in a second. Okay, so we have the case processing, colon in here. And what do we say if it's processing? We just want to say console.log still processing. Please be patient, ... Okay, something like this. And while it's still processing, nothing needs to be done, so we break out of the case. And the final case we want to cover is error, what I just said. And we do a colon here, and we do the case. The first thing we want to do is we want to console.log. There was an error. Okay. Next up, we will clear the interval as well, because now if there is an error, it will ultimately stay an error. So it would rerun again and again and again and again, because it doesn't care if there's an error. So we need to tell it to stop the interval if there's an error. And we do that by clear interval. And then we do check analysis completion here. Okay, and then we break out of this switch case as well. Now we have our complete switch logic finished. This already looks pretty solid. Now there is one crucial part missing still, which is the actual refresh interval. Now to implement that, we just make a comma here as a condition, and we put, or as an argument, and we put that in here. So this is in milliseconds. So let's say I want to recheck that every 2 seconds. So I put the number 2000 here. How I actually prefer to do it is, I like to create another variable here on top, which is called const refresh interval or something like this. And then I just set it to 2000, because then it's clearly visible for me. And if I need to search it always in here, it's a little bit cumbersome. So we do refresh interval down below here. Now we actually have everything in place, and our code, in theory at least, should work. Now what we didn't do yet is, we can actually remove that. What we didn't do yet is we didn't call our transcript function, or get transcript function, which we of course need to do. So we do get transcript, and we just call this function. Okay, let's see what's going to happen if we run this code. So we do node assembly.js. Okay, it's sending the audio file over. Still processing. Please be patient. Again, 2 seconds later, 2 seconds later, and it's completed. There we go. Our interval worked flawlessly. Now, of course, this needs to be built more dynamically. If the size of the audio files you submit for transcription vary a lot, then the 5 seconds or 2 seconds might be a bit too short. I mean, you can always put it to 10 seconds or even a minute or half a minute or something like this if you work with larger files, so that it's not sending too many requests to the API, because you want to limit the requests that you send to an API as little as possible. So I would play around with that refresh value. But I think the general logic of the setInterval method here is getting pretty clear in a live example like this. I always found it a bit confusing checking out and reading examples of people who do that, and they build in an artificial timer and stuff like this, which are more numbers included and stuff like this. So I found it to be actually more logical or better to understand if I demonstrate that on a live example, on a live application, because now you have an actual use case, because this is something you would implement in an actual application. Now, of course, we can now go ahead and instead of just logging completed, we could just say console log transcript status. So we can make that a template string, and we can say transcription status, and then we do our template string in here, and then we just throw that in there. Then it will just log that, whatever the status is, and after it says it's completed, we can then also go ahead and do something with the actual result, which we can access by the transcript variable. So we can do console.log, and we can say, let's say, another template string, the transcribed text is, let's make a new line, and then let's put that in here. So we say transcript dot data dot, I think it's text. Okay, so that you get actually a clear idea of why we're doing this. So again, we're sending this audio file over for transcription, still processing 3 times as expected, because the audio file is 10 seconds long, and then boom, you get transcript status completed, and the transcribed text is, and this is the transcribed text here. Now if you actually go to the URL of this audio file, in case you guys have no idea what I'm talking about all the time here, what kind of audio file is he talking about? Let me pull that up real quick if I can find the browser, and I'm gonna paste that in here.
My dear Fanny, you feel these things a great deal too much. I am most happy that you like the chain.
Okay, so this is the audio file that I'm actually talking about. It's a 6-second long audio file. And as you can see, this is exactly what has been transcribed here, so our application is working. Now you can play around with this using different kind of applications where you need to check if some data has changed or not, and I think this has many use cases if we are talking about pure JavaScript or Node.js. Alright guys, I really hope showing you this in a live example makes more sense than using any kind of artificial timer when we talk about the setInterval method. I also recommend you guys to check out the MDN page on the setInterval method, because there is a lot of text written that you can read. There is a lot of things you can do with the setInterval, but I think this should make it pretty clear. If you have any additional questions, drop them in the comments below. Let me know how you like this video. I'm just getting started doing programming content. If that's something what you like, and I'm always trying to make complicated stuff as easy as possible for every beginner to understand. That's why we are also moving a little bit slower. Then by all means, please subscribe to the channel, because there will be a lot of JavaScript and programming content coming in the near future. I thank you very much for watching, and I hope that video helps. Until then.